It is October 6th, 2025, and as we approach the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th attacks, I want to take a look back at what we know now when it comes to the planning, when it comes to who was involved, what we know about where the axis of resistance stood, what we know about how Iran and Hezbollah and Ansar Allah were all kept in the dark, and also what we know about what Israel did know and chose not to act on. We got into all of the latest and what it means for the region with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Kevork Almassian, a geopolitical analyst and host of Syriana Analysis. Kevork, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's always great to have you on the show. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that it has been nearly 2 years since the October 7th attacks, and your recent post on X actually caught my eye because you noted that not only did Iran and Hezbollah have no prior knowledge about these attacks, but that even Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh was kept in the dark. Can you take us through what we know about how these attacks were coordinated and why the axis of resistance was not fully included in the planning?
So from the Hamas perspective, this operation has to be, or they were supposed to keep it secret from everyone, including the Israelis, from the allies, because the surprise element is the most important element when you are going to attack your enemy and caught them off guard. And in this case, first few days, everybody believed that this was a surprise attack. And if you follow the press nowadays, every single mainstream media says this was a surprise attack. And I'm not questioning now whether or not Hamas had good intentions or bad intentions from this operation. But when we speak about an axis of resistance, or what used to be called an axis of resistance, which includes different players, and when the support to the non-state actors come from superior powers, and in this case, state actors, one of which is Iran, the other one is Syria, I think the operation itself had huge repercussions on the region. It has unleashed, of course, a genocidal war against the Palestinian people. And I have to make a big disclaimer here. I'm not blaming the Palestinians for being genocided. Israelis are the only one who carried the responsibility of carrying out the genocide because this was a decision made before October 7. Before October 7, the Netanyahu government and also the radical far right, let's say, maniacs in Israel, they have a messianic vision. And they want to establish a greater Israel. And the greater Israel is between the Euphrates and the Nile, including the entirety of the Palestinian territories. So what differs Netanyahu from his predecessors is just the pace of the process. His predecessors, they also built settlements. They also built an apartheid system in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And they have also imposed a siege on the Gaza Strip, but they preferred a gradual ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, something that doesn't create a big backlash in the international public opinion. So since the Oslo Accords, when the Palestinian Liberation Organization has acknowledged the existence of the Israeli state and agreed to participate in peace talks with Israel, Israel has never stopped building settlements. They have increased the pace of the settlements and they kicked out the Palestinians every week and every month, and they brought settlers from all around the world into Palestinian territories. But when October 7 happened, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he went into accelerating the process of ethnic cleansing and genocide against the Palestinians, which created all this backlash. Now, my criticism for Hamas, and I'm not a military expert, however, I'm trying to analyze the outcome of the October 7 attack. The timing of it, in my opinion, was not the best in the interests of the Palestinians and in the interests of the people in the region. Because most people, in my opinion, they cannot really link between the conflicts in Syria and in Palestine. They always try to detach these conflicts from each other. They say Syria is separate from Palestine. But that's against the logic of geography and against the logic of history and against the logic of geopolitics. What happened in Syria was because Syria was supporting the Palestinian armed struggle and the Palestinian rights of return, and Syria rejected to push the Palestinians under the bus and paid a huge price for that. 14 years of war was not about democracy, human rights, and all these cliches that we heard in the press, but rather because of Syria's geopolitical posture. Now, some people come and say, but Assad was not supporting the Palestinians as much as you think he was. Now, Syria had limited resources, and through these limited resources supported the Palestinians, at least didn't betray the Palestinians as the other Arab and Gulf monarchies have done. Now, Syria was considered the strategic depth in the axis of resistance. It was considered the hub which connects between Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, and Iran. And once the hub is gone, the axis of resistance has crumbled. It's broken. So in my opinion, it was important for Hamas or any other group in Palestine to discuss this case, especially with the superior powers in the region, especially Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, because the logic of international politics is non-state actors cannot drag states into regional wars. And this type of attack has triggered a regional war with different dimensions and with different spheres and levels. And in my opinion, keeping them in dark, knowing well that the ideology, the ideological and religious duty of Hezbollah, Iran, and at least Ansarullah would encourage them to come in supportive of the Palestinians at a timing when Syria is in tatters. It is divided into three spheres of influence. This was before the regime change war. And Hezbollah is overstretched in Syria in order to keep the Syrian state intact and keep the regime, let's say, in Syria intact, so they could still use it as a hub to bring logistics, military assistance from Iraq and from Iran. And that's why Israel continued bombing the Iranian assets until the last moments of the Assad days, because they were targeting meetings, including the meeting in the consulate, because they were coordinating the military and diplomatic and political response against Israel. So Syria was an important player in this. So during this time, the priority should have been keeping Syria intact and continue and allow it to continue to play its role, natural role, as a strategic depth for what used to be called the axis of resistance, and also the coordination hub. Once this gone, because as I mentioned, Hezbollah was overstretched in Syria, and when they participated in the defensive war, let's say in defense of the Palestinians, they had to withdraw their forces from Syria and send them back to southern Lebanon. And once that happened, Turkey and Israel, they moved Jolani on the chessboard in Idlib, and they knocked Assad out, which led into a regime change and bringing an anti-axis of resistance regime in Syria. Now the Palestinians stay on their own. That's why now when you see the surrounding of Palestine, Egypt has Camp David Accords. It has security ties with Israel and the United States, and it doesn't want for Hamas to be continue ruling Gaza. They are against the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. Jordan is the same. The current Syria is the same, and half Lebanon is the same, especially after the decapitation of Lebanon. So if you look into the geography, Palestinians are isolated, which means the Palestinians had to agree conditionally to engage in this so-called Trump deal, although in my opinion, there is no good deal for the Palestinians without Syria. Because as I mentioned, Syria was the connecting dot between these different players in the region. So when I tried to see the outcome of the October 7, there were, of course, a huge outrage in the Western public, American public, on the official level, right? But on the popular level, the Palestinians won the public opinion in the US on most part and in Europe on most part, something that Israel is frightened of. But public opinion in the West should not be overstated, should not be this crucial factor that we think it will change the foreign policy of the governments. It looks to me that the majority of German people say that what Israel is doing in Gaza is wrong. So is the German government following the opinion of their people? No. In the United States, it's the same. 60% of the people say Israel has to stop bombing Gaza. An increasing number of people say Israel is committing genocide. Is the Trump administration listening to their people? No. So the public opinion is important, but the governments in the collective West are so committed for Israel, and they see Israel as a very important player in the region, which assures and secures their dominance over the region, that they cannot sacrifice it in any way or shape, even if Israel is committing genocide. So I would argue and say, yes, the Palestinians won on the public relations level, because reality and truth cannot be hidden, and the sunshine cannot be hidden, just like the sunshine cannot be hidden. And the responsibility lies completely on the Israelis for committing this heinous onslaught against the Palestinians. However, I would also argue and say, had Hamas discussed this issue with the other players in the axis of resistance, I'm sure that these players would have advised Hamas for a better timing to carry out such an attack, because of the conditions that I explained, which was overstretching of different players in the region and being involved into other conflicts which are directly related in the Palestine cause. That's why when I criticize the timing of the Hamas operation, I think this is a legitimate point that we have to raise. Otherwise, I think we could be hiding behind our finger, because the facts and realities on the ground show that genocide has already been committed, and the Palestinian people lost their lives, their present, their future. Gaza is completely decimated. People celebrate, they say, yeah, but the ethnic cleansing has not happened yet. But the Palestinian, I would also argue and say but the Palestinian people was destroyed in part or in whole. And this is the legal definition of genocide, because the Palestinian people have no perspective now, have no say about their future. They handed over this file to the Arabic countries, and this especially the Gulf monarchies, they are collaborators with Israel and the United States. And in my opinion, the end goal is still the same. They have just sugar-coated it now in humanitarian terms, that we will bring some humanitarian aid into Gaza. We will bring a transitional government headed by Tony Blair. Sorry, what the fuck? So, in my opinion, the Palestinian human has lost a lot during this discourse of the war. It has been decimated, smashed, subjugated, humiliated, right? So my priority is to bring dignity to the Palestinians. Therefore, this so-called peace deal of Trump is not going to work, because they don't solve the core issue of the problem, and that is why the Palestinian carried an arm from the first place. Why someone carries an arm and fights back? Because this person was cornered after decades of occupation and subjugation. Therefore, by subjugating them more, is just going to increase the resistance against them. And with different shapes of forms. In the 60s and the 70s, this was a nationalist, a left-wing Marxist resistance against the Israeli occupation forces. But they killed all the intellectuals, assassinated all the intellectuals in Palestine, all the writers, all the cartoonists, and they exiled the left-wing socialist, Marxist, communist, nationalist leadership from Palestine. And what happened? A vacuum for the Islamists to fill this vacuum. And once Hamas came and filled this vacuum, Israel comes and says, look, we no longer have a partner for negotiation, for peace talks, because our opponent is now a jihadist. This is how they describe them, right? And if it's a jihadist, you don't discuss with the jihadists, you bomb them, and you bomb them without any accountability. If the Palestinian resistance now is all Hamas, you would say those are terrorists. This is how Israel marketed its war against the Palestinians, especially after 9/11, by saying, look, it's Hamas, it's Islamic Jihad. We don't have a partner to talk. We can bomb them and we can kill them as many as we want, and nobody will blink an eye. So Israel also helped create the enemy it likes, Because imagine if the resistance is someone trying to link between the apartheid of South Africa, the struggles of the Algerians, the South Africans, in different places around the world where the Americans and the empire has been occupying and trying to subjugate them, and try to unify this literature or internationalize this literature and talk to the Western audiences, link East and West. That is more dangerous for Israel than a group which speaks in an Islamist language, and it is easier for them to sell the narrative that they're terrorists and we have to finish this. So I think this was a really difficult, multi-layered operation from Israel, decades long. October 7 didn't start it, it just accelerated what Israel wanted to do.
Yeah, wow, that is a lot of really important information. And I appreciate the fact that you're drawing the connection and showing how everything is connected, because I mean, over the last year, we've seen it as so many people will say, hey, I stand with the Palestinians, right? This is a genocide. And then they look at Syria and they're like, oh, Assad's bad. He needs to go. And they do not understand that at the end of the day, everything is connected, and that this is exactly what the US loves to do, right? This is how the US think tanks do it. They try to overextend all of these different pillars of the multipolar world intentionally. That's exactly what they've been doing with Russia, to say, oh, you want to help Syria? You want to be over here and here? Oh, well, here's Ukraine. Now you have to focus on this specific war, and you can't, be over here. You have to be in this one position. Whereas as you're looking at Syria, you're looking at Hezbollah, you're looking at, all of these different places within the axis of resistance where they have been directly impacted by this genocide, and the fact that now they have to step in, now they have to do something to respond. And I do want to get into the aspect of kind of what we know about Israel's involvement, because it's been very interesting to watch. As even just this last weekend, you've got reports of tens of thousands of people taking to the streets in Israel to demand that the Israeli government sign on to Trump's deal for Gaza to allow for the release of the hostages, right? They suddenly care about the hostages. They don't care about the Israeli government waging genocide. That doesn't matter. That's obviously been ongoing for much longer than just the last 2 years. But I mean, you've got reports that Netanyahu had warnings about the fact that there was going to be an attack coming from Gaza, and he ignored it. You've got reports that the Israeli forces were directly involved in killing civilians on October 7th. So how do you see Israel's involvement now 2 years later? And I guess that kind of goes back to the point that you were making, that they've continued to use this claim that, oh, we have to wage war against Hamas to justify a genocide. And for all of these politicians, all of these Gulf states, they've just continued to go along with it.
Actually, in the first few days, I was also, just like any other person, I had the impression that Israel was caught off guard. But then reports after reports, and those are reliable intelligence reports, came, one of which was the Egyptian intel has warned the Israeli side that there is something being cooked and there is an attack going to happen from Gaza, and the Israelis have ignored that. They denied it, the Israelis denied it, but I believe the Egyptians in this case, because they're the ones who said, we warned the Israelis an attack is being cooked from Gaza. Because they were also very close to the Gaza borders and they were watching inside. The several other indications, one of which was the order from the Israeli chief of staff to not act on the attacks until a few hours later. Now, the geography of Palestine or Israel is very, if you look at it with a helicopter, in a few minutes you can come from Tel Aviv to Gaza. But they haven't done that. They acted a few hours later when Hamas was still inside the kibbutzes and some of the settlements, and they were taking hostages. And even ordinary people from Gaza were walking inside the kibbutzes, and there were no responses, right? And we know that this area is highly watched, controlled, and there are automated guns all over the places. And they have also Air Force and lots of intelligence and technological means to detect such attacks. In my opinion, I think this is what Israel has done is a big deception It's let it happen attack. They watched Hamas planning this attack. They allowed it to happen to justify the genocide against the Palestinians. But Hamas, when they attacked the kibbutzes, they mostly captured soldiers, and they mostly killed soldiers, and they took prisoners of war. So there is this conflation between the terms hostages and prisoners of war. But they, if you notice, they always use hostages, and they show the faces of women. They say, look, they captured women. But those are female soldiers. They are prisoners of war. So Hamas mostly captured prisoners of war or killed Israeli soldiers. But the Israeli army, after a few hours, intervened, enacting the Hannibal Directive with the confession now of Israeli officials. And the Hannibal Directive is giving the orders to Israeli soldiers to shoot and kill any Hamas operative or any Palestinian person holding an Israeli prisoner of war or a hostage and taking them back to Gaza, which means you are allowed to engage in killing Israeli citizens in order to stop Hamas operatives from taking hostages or prisoners of war into Gaza. Now, there is a famous footage of the parking lot in one of these rave parties which we saw. The footage we saw of Hamas, they had AK-47s, M16s, and RPGs. Those were the weapons they had. The footage we saw from the parking lot of the rave is the complete obliteration, the destruction, and blowing up of tens of vehicles. Now, the AK-47 and M16s and RPGs cannot do these things unless there was an RPGs involved to bomb these cars from the air. These cars would not have been blown up that way, which I would assume and say that Israeli Air Force and Israeli soldiers were actively engaged in the Hannibal Directive to kill their own citizens, because this could be used later in the atrocity propaganda, which they again enacted after the war, decapitated babies, people burned alive, women raped, and all this stuff that we heard. Those were atrocity propaganda. And all these factors that I mentioned go into the same direction. You want to create a public opinion to swallow the fact that you're going to kill every person in Gaza. And this is what Netanyahu said, this is what Gallant said, and this is what Israeli officials said, that they are Amaleks, and we're going to kill them all, whether they are humans, whether they're men, women, children, animals. So they wanted to create this public perception, but it took them too long. If Israel finished the job, let's say in 2 weeks, in 1 month, with minimum casualty rate, and forced the Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip, just like they anticipated, this would have probably played in the hands of Israel. They would probably, the public opinion would not have waken up to the fact that this was a long-term plan to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, because we need a one-state solution for the Zionist state. And because if Israel wants to create a one-state solution, the 2 million people are a big obstacle during elections, because they cannot continue with an apartheid system for another 50 years. At some point, they have to organize some fair elections for everyone. But if you have a Palestinian people whose birth rate are much higher than the Jewish people, and 2 million people in Gaza, basically they have a high birth rate, they want to get rid of them. This is the logic driving behind this. One state solution, probably 1 million Arabs in the future Israeli state, that's tolerable for them. They can bring them under control. But a few million Palestinians, 7-8 million Palestinians, with the potential of becoming 10 million Palestinians in 2050, that's a huge demographic threat for the mindset of the Zionists, which believes in the one-state solution. Meanwhile, the Arabs, whether Christians or Muslims, are second and third-class citizens. So in this case, the Israelis went into business of ethnic cleansing. They couldn't do it until this moment, and I think the Israelis at the moment, they will engage into another deception or deceptive acts to run away from this agreement, although this agreement is in their favor, but they want an absolute complete annihilation of the Palestinians, which I believe that the Americans, especially the American administration, will always give excuses, and they will always create this fake infighting between Trump and Netanyahu. He picked the phone, he called him, he acted like a Rambo, etc., and he bashed him, but then nothing happens, you know. The weapons continue flowing into Israel, the bombs are being dropped on the Palestinians' head, and 60% to 70% of the casualty rate is among the children and women. And this is, it never happened in the past decades that such a war is being conducted by one side, which kills a percentage of the population. 70% of them are from the vulnerable people. Those are non-fighting age or non-fighting gender, let's say in this case. So will Trump succeed in bringing a lasting peace? The short answer is no, because they haven't solved the root cause of the issue. If one state solution is being promoted, where everyone, Jews, Christians, Muslims, atheists, whatever, Hindus, are all equal in front of the Constitution and treated with respect and dignity, regardless of the name of the entity, you know, let's call it whatever Stan. It doesn't matter. As long as the people are respected there and being treated with dignity, they will no longer have the urge to fight any longer. But the human psychology is very simple. After seeing all this humiliation, you have two choices. You either fight back or you accept humiliation. And many people chose to fight. And I think that's the circle of history.
Yeah, wow. That is a very important way to look at this, I think, as you're watching, as we're getting to this 2-year anniversary. And as I know that so many in the media in the West are going to continue with that atrocity propaganda, right? Continue to justify this genocide, act as if this is a war that has only been going on for the last 2 years. And yeah, when I look at Trump and what he's presenting, I'm going, there's no way that the US and Israel are going to voluntarily just end a genocide and allow for peace or give the Palestinians any rights. And they've shown us the entire way through what they are going to do, how they are going to do it. And they've really ramped it up when it comes to this genocide and extermination of the Palestinian people just over the last 2 years. I know that there is a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to educate us on some of these very important topics here. Kevork Almassian, a geopolitical analyst and host of Syriana Analysis. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and congratulations for the 150,000, right, subscriptions now on YouTube.
Thank you, and congratulations to you on your 100,000. We're getting there slowly but surely.
Yes.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you